Hello there. The summer seems to finally be over, and yes, I'm happy about that. The humid, hot weather and stickiness of my office has come to an end, and I can finally make videos again without sweating. Today, I want to talk to you about narcissistic love for the golden child. Remember that the key thing is that it's all about control. My mother always claimed that she was a cool mom, and I thought she must be. Certainly, she's an interesting person, and she has done things many people would think of as cool. For example, when I was around 16, she offered to buy me beer so I could drink it and get drunk in front of her, as opposed to going out and partying with my friends, her rationale being that it would be safer for me. Naturally, as a 16-year-old, this idea turned me off, but it did make me think my mother was different and perhaps cooler than other mothers. But I still didn't want to drink in front of her. I wanted to drink with my friends, once I was ready, that is. I actually didn't end up drinking any alcohol for about 2 more years after that time. So it's like she was trying to start me early or something. And that memory really stuck with me. But for the longest time, I always just thought it was a memory of how interesting and different and cool and hip my mom was. But then I didn't know she was a narcissist for a very long time. So I did start drinking towards the end of high school, just recreationally, and not that often. Mainly because my peers were doing it, and I found I liked how it took my anxiety away. When I went to college, my roommates were big time drinkers, especially one of them, and so was everyone there that I met. We often had parties in my dorm room, and alcohol was a big part of my entire first semester, actually, my entire first year, and indeed the entire 4 years I was there. So I drank a lot, and I became drunk quite often. This was part of the fun of being in college, supposedly, and living it up. It was also a way for me to avoid my feelings that I didn't want to be there and that I wasn't free from my parents. I didn't know that I wasn't free from my parents at that time, of course. And so many years went by of me drinking after college, and in fact, as a way for me to avoid my uncomfortable feelings about my parents. But I didn't realize that for a very long time. And then I mentioned that I didn't want to be there. My narcissistic father had pushed me into going to college when I was 18, and I left Alaska and went to Oregon to attend college. It was the first time I'd ever been away from home for a long period of time, and I was very frightened about the experience, and I wasn't ready to go, but I went anyway. And I was there for 4 years. I drank all the time and somehow graduated from college, which was a miracle. I actually did quite well. When I was 21, I was visiting my hometown in Fairbanks for the Thanksgiving holiday. This is in Alaska. And I went out to a popular nightclub in my town with an old high school buddy. We thought it would be fun to do an adult thing together, as growing up in high school, obviously, we were underage. We had had some alcoholic beverages together, but we had never been able to go out to a bar or do anything like that in our hometown because we weren't old enough. And we'd been friends for a while, so we thought, well, we're 21 now, so we can go do this thing that we were never able to do before. That night, I drank way too much, and I ended up getting a DUI that night. I slept the whole night in the jail, mostly drunk. I woke up and I was very hungover. I made a phone call to my mother from the jail cell, and she came and visited me in jail. And I was so surprised, I remember, because I thought she was going to be really angry at me. And actually, she just laughed with me in prison like I'd done nothing wrong. So she was on the other side of the glass, like you see in the television shows, and I was on the inside and she was on the outside. I was in my blue jumpsuit, in my paper slippers, and hungover and looking terrible. And she was laughing with me on the other side, and she was so nice to me. And I was really surprised and somewhat taken aback, but also, I felt glad that she was not angry with me. So this experience and the previous experience where she offered to buy me alcohol taught me that she accepted me and showed me some sort of unconditional love. But it seemed like I was getting it, especially this unconditional love, when I was drinking and or when I was drunk. More so than when I was sober and trying to do good, productive things for myself. I guess I just never felt a strong sense of love from her when I wasn't drinking. It always felt like it was forced. And in these experiences, when I was in trouble, I felt like she had more regard for me in some weird way. Anyway, it's hard for me to explain that, but she was there for me, and so I started to drink more. And I think that this is related, my drinking more, to wanting her to love me more. And it's very hard to explain why I think that. I just do. And subconsciously, I just think I had the hope that she would love me more unconditionally if I was drunk more often. Anyway, I ended up marrying a Norwegian. The fact that she's Norwegian doesn't have much to do with the story, but I think it's interesting, so I'm adding that. When I was 24, and her and I were both codependent and drank quite frequently. It was one of our pastimes and one of the things that we liked doing together when we first met. And so we ended up doing that together quite a bit throughout the entire time we were married. We did that for 9 years. We drank quite often. During that time, one night after my lady and I went out to eat dinner at a nice restaurant in town to celebrate my possibly getting a job with the CIA, I got another DUI, this time getting in an accident. I actually was driving a truck at this time, a brand new truck I had, and I remember all the other guys that were on, I had to do volunteer service this time after I was sober the next day, and I got my punishments handed down to me. So a couple months later, I had to do volunteer work at any rate. And I was telling the guys on my volunteer team who had also gotten DUIs how I'd gotten my DUI, and I remember they were all laughing because originally the police were going to charge the other guy who hit me because I was turning on a yellow light when I was drunk, which I of course don't remember, and he hit me going through a red light. And so they were going to charge him. His car was totaled, but then they realized I was drunk, so then they dropped the charges on him and they just charged me instead. So anyway, and the judge in that case had to recuse himself because he knew me as a friend of my parents. So that was very embarrassing. He wondered aloud in the courtroom, I remember this, what was going on with me in court. I wondered the same thing. Being in jail this time, I felt like a hardened criminal, and I really mean that. The first time I'd gotten my DUI, I felt really guilty, and in Alaska at least, when you wake up the following morning after being in the drunk tank, they, at a certain time, around 2 p.m., I think, they took all of the DUI people and they put us in a room, and over a webcam connected television. Some judge in another building in a different part of town went through each case of every person in that room, which is kind of odd because I didn't know any of these people, and he was going through all our cases while we were all in the same room. And I remember I just pled guilty because I was like, well, I was drunk and I crashed my car and I fell asleep in it and I got caught, so obviously I was guilty. I learned from that experience, and so for the second DUI, I learned to plead not guilty, even though I was, and to get a lawyer later on. I bailed myself out with my credit card, and I walked to the local diner, called the friends of mine who I'd hung out with the night before, and they came and picked me up from the jail. So I didn't have to rely on my mom this time. I hired the lawyer who slept with my wife because he was the only one I knew. He was also a drunk, and in fact, he even got wasted with me at his law office as we were talking about my case, and he drove us over to a diner and bought a jukebox with me. He offered to do my legal work for free because of what he did to my relationship, and I took him up on the offer. Later, I paid him $350 because he was desperate for money. He did a good job negotiating for me. He got me an ankle bracelet and a reduced fine, and instead of serving the mandatory 21 days for a second DUI in jail, I was happy with the result. I got to go to work, not telling anyone I went to work with, and I got to wear my ankle bracelet for 21 days. When I told my mother what happened, she seemed surprised and alarmed, but again was very easygoing with me. I was too afraid of my stepfather to tell him what happened, and I didn't tell him until many years later. My mother also didn't tell him. She claimed it would be too hard on him. The lesson for me was that I was a bad kid who made his life difficult, as always. Even after I got divorced when I was single, I continued to drink, even more than before actually, and this time I did it alone while living by myself with just my cats I inherited from my ex-wife. I would often drink a bottle of wine a day. I told myself it was under control because it was just wine, which makes very little sense. But to me, it made sense at the time. I was a functioning drinker and managed to hold down a good job this entire time. I remember the signs were all there that I was definitely having a problem with alcohol, because I even had to buy makeup to wear on especially bad hangover days because I would become very pale. So I would wear like this rouge on my cheeks to make it look like I wasn't hungover and that I was actually just rosy and healthy. And it was very effective, actually. My mother bought me a wine rack and cases of wine, on several occasions after these experiences while I was living alone. She encouraged my drinking, and as I hadn't resolved my issues and thought it made her love me more, she always was nice to me when I was drinking, nicer than usual. I enjoyed her gifts and just kept right on drinking. I stopped drinking regularly about 5 years ago, and I'm so happy to have cut that out of my life. It's amazing. I don't think I ever became an alcoholic because I can have a glass of wine or a beer or a stiff drink, and I really don't want to drink more. Sometimes I will have 2 glasses of wine or 2 drinks, rarely more than 1 beer. My body just doesn't like it anymore, and I don't really care for being drunk anymore, so that just is not something that I do anymore. And I also love having dreams, good dreams, lots of interesting dreams now, and I don't wake up hungover anymore, which is, of course, great. I just think it's very sick that my mother encouraged this behavior in me, and also think it's very interesting that I found small bits of love for her in my drinking. I mean, I felt real love from her when I was drinking. It was pretty bizarre. And I think that is the main reason I kept drinking, because of her encouragement and my desire for that love. My drinking was a way for me to feed that fantasy. Ultimately, of course, it didn't work, but I just made this discovery of this connection between my drinking and my narcissistic mother in the past couple weeks. And it's really been, like many things with learning that my parents are narcissists, it's been really eye-opening, this and many other things that I'll be talking about in later videos. So anyway, if you have similar issues or know someone who does, and maybe they just appear to be binge drinkers or heavy drinkers and you're not sure why, this video might be valuable for them. Maybe they have issues with their parents that are unresolved. I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case. So you can share this video with them, and I do hope it can be of some help to others. I enjoyed sharing my story, and I'd like to hear other people's stories. So if you like this video, please click the like button, of course, and feel free to comment below. Thanks for watching.